Hi there. Today we're going to pick up where we left off the story of Joshua and his people going into the land of Canaan that God had promised a long time before to Abraham. And this story gets a little complicated here because he had sent out spies to find out about the city of Jericho that they had to go past and through to get into the land. And the people there were not going to let them go. But they had made an arrangement with a couple of the people who lived there to help them. But there was one other thing that was in the way before they could do that, and that was a river. Before they left Egypt, or when they left Egypt, they had to go through an entire sea, and God had parted the waters to one side and the other and had helped them escape from the king of Egypt's army. But now they needed to cross a river, and they weren't quite sure about it. But this is what happened. Before God's people could enter the land of Canaan, they had to cross the river Jordan. And Joshua knew that they needed to trust God. He listened very carefully as God told him how to get the people across the river. Early the next morning, God's people packed up their camp. They brought out the Ark of the Covenant, a very special golden chest that held the laws of God. The priests carried the ark. It's not an ark like Noah's Ark. It's the same word, but it meant something slightly different. Not a boat, but a box. When they arrived at the river Jordan, the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went first. And as they stepped into the river, its waters parted, and there was a dry place for God's people to walk on to get to the other side. And here's a picture. Kind of reminds you of people crossing the Red Sea. It was at that point about 40 years before this happened, and it happened again this time, but with a river instead of the sea. And instead of leaving someplace, they were going into someplace. And as the leaders crossed the river, each one chose a stone from the middle of the river. And when they got to the other side, they stacked them all up. And whenever they would look at the stones, they would remember how God had helped them. Sometimes you might be riding around in the car with your parents and you might see stones. We call them memorial stones. And sometimes they are in a park. And sometimes they're just right in the middle of the street that remind us of things that have happened in the past, like people who have died in wars or places where important things have happened. Those memorials are important things. They help us remember. And this memorial that was put up by Joshua and the people, it was one of the really, really important ones because it reminded them every time they saw it that they were standing in a place where God had done something wonderful for them. And maybe there's some time that you especially remember God doing something really good for you. And maybe you have something that helps you to remember it. Sometimes people will carry a little cross in their pocket, or they'll wear a necklace that has a little cross on it that they carry because it reminds them about how Jesus gave his life for them. Something most wonderful of all that God has done for all of us. The things that remind us of God are important. And the stories that are in the Bible that remind us all about God and talk about the things that God has done. Those are very, very, very important stories. And that's why we tell them over and over and over. And that's why you can come back tomorrow night for yet another good story. Until then, sleep well and have a good tomorrow.